Right.
We're not talking about, tiny, whimsical urban furniture. We are talking about the ultimate expression of system efficiency,
Hmm.
the kind that when you push it to its absolute limit, it inevitably leads to systemic failure. I mean,
Yeah.
you look at Japan and you see this just absolute devotion to precision,
Well,
right?
completely.
They literally hold the world record for the shortest escalator. It's like 2.7 feet high
In Kyoto, right?
since the 50s.
Yeah, in a department store running since the late 1950s. It's this tiny symbol of maximizing every single square inch of space.
But that's the thing, that exact same obsessive maximization, that's what defines the internal pressure we're looking at. It's the philosophy that produces the Oshia.
The pushers.
The professional pushers, white gloves, the whole uniform, their entire job is to maximize human density, to literally physically cram bodies into train cars until you achieve this peak, unbearable efficiency.
So the surface order is just meticulous.
Flawless.
Yeah.
But the internal chaos is, well, it's intense. And that tension is the entire architectural premise of the modern Japanese crisis. I think we have to go back to that single moment, that one point when the foundational social contract just shattered.
The economic betrayal of the 1990s.
Exactly. For decades, through the whole post-war miracle, the 50s, 60s, 70s, the promise was so clear. Lifetime employment, stability, and the ability for men to be the providers.
It was a contract.
Yeah.
And that contract, it was rooted in this post-war Confucian premise. It defined the entire masculine identity around the Daikoku Bushira.
The great central pillar.
Literally, the great central pillar. The man as the sole economic and emotional support of the house. So when the bubble bursts and you get the stagnation, the deflation, the shift to irregular work,
The Hake and Shane.
right, the non-regular workers,
Yeah.
that didn't just hurt the stock market. It shattered that pillar. The economy itself became the wrecking ball.
So that's the mission for this deep dive, to really understand the gap between that hyper-controlled surface of Japan, the cool Japan, the advanced transit, and the massive profitable machinery that was built specifically to manage all the fallout.
All the anxiety, the failed masculinity, and the deep repressed desire of a population that was suddenly just adrift.
The official narrative is one of, technological sophistication and cultural cool.
Right, and our job is to trace the shockwaves of that 90s collapse and see where all that despair actually went. Because the goals, they just shifted so fundamentally. If you were a young woman in the 1980s, the goal was, well, it was to marry a man with 3 highs.
High income, high height, high educational background.
Yep, marriage was effectively a permanent, guaranteed job.
But once the economy stopped guaranteeing the man a permanent job, it couldn't guarantee the woman's security anymore.
The whole system just failed to deliver. It broke that foundational contract and forced these new, often commercialized escapes to emerge in the vacuum of that broken promise.
And those escapes, they reveal exactly how that patriarchal system just unwound itself. The whole idea that the public economic space belonged to the father and the private domestic space belonged to the mother.
And once the father was financially crippled, that entire definition of it disintegrated.
So let's unpack that breakdown. Let's start with the disappearance, the vanishing man. Because this erosion of masculine identity was so tied to your job, your occupation, it must have been profound when the floor just fell out.
It was catastrophic. I mean, the statistics on unemployment from that post-bubble crisis,
Yeah.
they tell the story of just existential self-doubt. For young men, specifically, the 15 to 24 age bracket, the unemployment rate more than doubled. It jumped from 4.5% in 1990 to 11.1% in 2002. They were trying to enter the workforce right as that lifelong contract was being publicly revoked.
And it's so crucial to remember this wasn't just a youth problem, right? The system failed the generation that had bought into it completely.
Look at the 45 to 54 bracket. These are the career men, the guys who had achieved seniority during the peak growth era. Their unemployment rate quadrupled from 1.1% to 4.3% in that same period. They weren't just losing jobs. They were losing their core identity, their entire purpose, their ability to be the Daikoku Bushira. And this pressure, it directly correlated with the steep rise in male suicides that were tied explicitly to employment situations. The failure was just too much to bear.
The shame, that feeling of having done something wrong, it becomes so massive that it requires a physical escape. And that's what brings us to Johatsu,
Evaporation.
the deliberate act of vanishing.
It is the ultimate psychological toll of conformity. Johatsu is driven by debt, by overwhelming expectations, or just the unbearable shame of failure in a society that leaves so little room for second chances. And this is just an anecdote. It's a recognized phenomenon. There are businesses that facilitate this.
They call them night movers, these companies that help you with your self-imposed exile. It sounds like something out of a spy novel.
But it's a market response to cultural pressure. It's a profound symptom of a system that just rejects visible failure. You hear these stories that just illustrate the depth of the shame. Like the businessman who just told his wife he was on a business trip and then vanished for a year.
Wow.
And he was constantly operating under this deep, internalized belief that he had done something wrong, even though the fault was with this crumbling economic structure around him. The flight it's a search for an alternative to suicide, when your public self is just deemed irreparable.
And the system, it kind of implicitly supports this, doesn't it, through the legal architecture or maybe the lack of it?
Precisely. Legal mechanisms in Japan intentionally restrict the ability of others, even your own family, to trace an adult. This system of legal privacy is what enables Johatsu to be a functional, albeit devastating, alternative.
It provides a life of anonymity and constant fear, sure.
Yes, but it also offers an escape valve from that immediate, crushing shame. It is the societal structure processing its own economic casualties by simply allowing them to disappear without a trace.
It's the ultimate systemic silence. Okay, so let's pivot to how this pressure impacts the most intimate space, the bedroom. If the man is fundamentally redefined by his failure and the woman's economic security is gone, how does that play out in a marriage?
Well, the strict adherence to traditional roles, even when those roles are financially undermined, that's the key.
Yeah.
The overwhelming common sentiment you hear is that once the first child is born, sexual intimacy at home just stopped.
The wife transitions instantly from a sexual person to the mom. It's like a required societal mandate.
It is. And the very idea of female pleasure is it's excluded from that script. It is fundamentally sidelined.
Why is that?
Because the traditional patriarchal structure never prioritized the woman's sexual identity or fulfillment. So many Japanese women view sex as mendokusai, a tedious chore, something they do instrumentally to appease the husband or, maintain the structural peace rather than a source of personal pleasure. And the collapse of the man's identity only deepens this dynamic. The transaction of sex is now just burdened by resentment and unfulfilled expectations on both sides.
Which suggests the system is actively undermining its own continuation, leading to the low birth rate crisis.
Right.
Yet, if we look at the official architectural plans for the future, the government isn't focused on repairing the family structure. They're focused on infrastructure management.
The documents from the Ministry of Land, Infrastructure, Transport, and Tourism, the MLIT, they confirm this pivot. When they surveyed citizens on the most important goals for creating a sustainable society, the highest priority wasn't restoring the traditional family or incentivizing fertility.
What was it?
The single most cited need, by 61.4% of respondents, was the creation of attractive workplaces and employment opportunities.
They're asking for a functioning modern economy, not a return to the 1950s patriarch.
Exactly. And the second priority, securing means of transportation for the elderly. This is the government accepting the demographic reality. They are managing the logistical impacts of a shrinking, aging, post-patriarchal population.
So they're focused on minimizing the infrastructural consequences of the social contract failure, not trying to enforce a defunct social ideal.
Which leads directly to the commercial structures that were built to monetize the resulting desire gap.
So if the man is shamed by his financial failure and starved of intimacy at home, he just buys the illusion of both. Let's talk about that colossal commercial architecture built to service this need, kabukicho.
Kabukicho is less a district and more a highly regulated, semi-legal ecosystem of commodified desire. We're talking about an area that hosts approximately 3,500 adult entertainment venues.
3,500?
Yeah, everything from massage parlors and specialized bars to love hotels. And the vast majority of this massive revenue stream is regulated and controlled by the Yakuza.
And the Yakuza's involvement isn't just passive protection, is it? It's a mechanism for order and efficiency within an inherently disorderly market.
It provides the structural incentive for compliance. It minimizes external legal interference, they organize the venues, they manage territory, and they ensure disputes are handled internally. It allows the commercial flow to remain efficient. And the primary customer is overwhelmingly the overworked salary man.
The very man whose emotional validation and self-worth were just destroyed by the system we were just talking about.
The very same.
And what allows this massive commerce to exist is this incredibly precise legal loophole in the Anti-Prostitution Act.
The official narrative, which is governed by the 1956 Anti-Prostitution Act, states that buying and selling sex for money is illegal. But Article 3 of the law is hyper-specific.
How so?
The ban is strictly limited to penetration only, and that creates this massive gray zone where services like soap plans, which offer these elaborate, non-penetrative sexual services, can operate completely openly.
So anything short of that one specific act is considered legal service and not prostitution. The legal definition is literally determining the structure of commercial intimacy.
And the penalties. They just underline the government's tacit acceptance of this mechanism as a social release valve. The penalty for the seller is a maximum of 6 months and a fine of up to $10,000.
That's what, less than $70 US?
Exactly. Given that an average transaction in kabukicho generates revenue far exceeding that, the fine is functionally negligible. It's a cost of doing business. Furthermore, the penalty only applies to the seller, never the client. This ensures the demand side remains completely immune to prosecution.
It's the perfect blueprint. A cheap legal deterrent that ensures the flow of commercial stress relief remains uninterrupted for the male workforce.
And this leads us to the darkest, most consolidated sector of this economy, the adult video, or AV, industry. This is where the architecture of power enables systemic coercion, despite recent legislative changes that were meant to protect performers.
The market consolidation alone is terrifying. 3 companies control between 70% and 80% of the entire AV market.
Which means the vast majority of talent is funneled through the same centralized mechanisms.
And those mechanisms often start with a narrative of false hope and fraudulent recruitment.
Absolutely. Women, frequently young, often coming from suburban areas hoping to break into modeling or mainstream TV, are lured into auditions. The recruiter appeals to their genuine aspirations. They sign these vague consent forms, and they're told they can withdraw at any time.
But once they're on site, the coercion begins, often through financial leverage.
It's the classic bait and switch. The contract, which is often signed under dubious circumstances or held over them without a transparent copy being provided, becomes an empty threat of manufactured debt. Even if the women want to back out, they're pressured with potential financial penalties or shame. There are documented cases of filming through outright fraudulent means, or where production companies just completely fail to provide signed contracts, leaving women legally unaware of their rights or the terms of their involvement.
It's institutionalized exploitation built on a foundation of vulnerability and aspiration. But the final product, the video, still has to be legal to sell, which requires the industry to comply with this bizarre form of self-censorship.
We're talking about Article 175 of the Penal Code. It prohibits the distribution of obscene objects. So to avoid that charge, the industry engages in mosaicing or pixelating genitals.
It's not about modesty.
No, it's a commercial necessity. Historically, they used May-Bari, which is adhesive tape, and now they use digital pixelation to ensure the videos pass the ethical review associations. This self-censorship is what ensured the legal flow of a product created in a system where consent is often compromised. It validates the profitability that's derived from structural violence.
The system just prioritizes the product flow above everything else. As long as the visual compliance is met, the ethical mechanisms of production can just be ignored.
And the fringes of this architecture are equally disturbing. We see the sad presence of touching B-girls, these sign girls standing outside venues, and critically, the documented instances of underage girls in this industry. They're typically girls who have run away from home or come from abusive family situations, which shows how the economic and emotional voids created by this collapsing structure just suck in the most vulnerable people on the margins.
Okay, so that's the male side of the commercial equation. Buying sex, buying release, buying self-worth. Now, let's flip the lens. What happens when women, suddenly possessing their own economic autonomy, decide to purchase their own intimacy?
That brings us to the host clubs.
The perfect, profitable inversion.
It is. Host clubs, which thrive parallel to the sex industry in kabukicho, are the marketplace for commodified male intimacy. The commodity being sold here isn't sex. It's jijiram.
Pseudo-romance.
Pseudo-romance, emotional support, and deep-focused flattery sold primarily to female consumers.
This reflects that economic power shift. I mean, why commit to the failing traditional marriage system, which only promises domestic servitude and a lack of emotional fulfillment, when you can just pay a handsome man to treat you like a goddess for 2 hours?
The host's role is to provide the emotional and relational experience that the traditional, overworked, and emotionally stunted salarymen cannot. They sell validation, and the economics are designed to prey on that emotional need.
The tabs are astronomical.
Insane. A few hours can run you $400 easily because the drinks are typically marked up 8 to 10 times the retail price. You're purchasing the performance, the intense emotional engagement, and the affirmation of your value.
And the internalization of all that societal pressure is what drives the truly staggering financial extremes we see.
It reveals just how deep the need for that emotional scaffolding runs. I mean, consider the notorious example of Akemi, a woman in her 40s who divorced her husband and then became a sex worker specifically to fund her host habit.
And over 8 years, she spent, what was it?
Well over $1 million on a single host, enabling him to reach the highest ranks of his club.
And even after she was financially ruined and the host moved on, she rationalized the entire thing.
She claims she did it voluntarily, specifically for the mental support and the personal strength she derived from that relationship. Her justification was that she satisfied mainly herself.
So this isn't just buying expensive companionship. It's a voluntary submission to a new set of commercial rules. Buying agency and emotional validation that the collapsed traditional structure completely failed to provide.
It proves the depth of the hunger for structure, even a manufactured, exploitative one.
And that desire for structure and validation, it's inextricably linked to how women are expected to present themselves, which leads us directly to the symbolic battleground of identity, kawaii.
Kawaii. It's derived from kauhayushi, which means face aglow. And it's often celebrated globally as soft power, right? The aesthetic of cuteness.
But domestically, its role is way more complex. It often functions as this subtle but powerful tool of cultural control.
Right. The analysis suggests that the pervasive presence of kawaii in fashion, media, manga, it doesn't just celebrate cuteness. It reinforces the stereotype that women must be fragile and passive.
That's the psychological interpreter at work. Kawaii actively limits social opportunities by framing the ideal female in the media as innocent, compassionate, and passive. So young women are just continuously exposed to this, and they internalize it, and they readily emulate this objectified and emotionally limited ideal because it's presented as the only path to acceptance.
But there's an architectural purpose here that is far more practical than just socializing women into passive roles. It's an efficiency mechanism. It's perfect for a high-context, high-precision society.
How so?
This is the striking insight. Research has actively shown that viewing cute images like pictures of baby animals or puppies improves behavioral performance and promotes more careful, focused behavior.
Wait, so cuteness literally makes you a more precise, careful worker?
It acts as a psychological priming mechanism. In specific studies, subjects were asked to perform tasks requiring high dexterity and meticulous attention, and the ones who viewed cute imagery demonstrated measurably better results and a narrower attentional focus.
That's unbelievable. So in a society that demands meticulous precision in manufacturing, in services, in conformity, kawaii isn't accidental aesthetics.
No, it's a constant cultural tool that's subtly encouraging the population to be more attentive, careful, and precise cogs in the systemic machine. It's industrialized emotional regulation.
But where there is intense pressure for conformity, there is always a reaction. People push back, they create subcultures. But even that rebellion seems to get quickly co-opted and commercialized.
That's the fascinating dynamic. You look at the fashion subcultures like Gyaru or Kogaru. They are intentionally deviant. They reject the mainstream. They set themselves apart through tan skin, specialized aesthetic choices, even specialized slang. They are textbook counterculture.
But the fashion institutions don't try to crush them. They build entire commercial empires around them.
They foster an essential interdependence. Commercial centers like Shibuya 109 thrive because of the Gyaru phenomenon. The subculture relies on the fashion houses for the constant supply of their aesthetic markers, and the fashion institutions rely on the subculture for trend-setting and massive revenue.
So the commercial architecture ensures that even deviation is immediately integrated into the economic framework. It neutralizes its rebellious power through profitability.
Exactly. Then you have the Lolita subculture, which presents a far more internally motivated form of resistance.
Lolita followers dress for self-expression, for the enjoyment of other Lolita girls. They're actively rejecting the traditional male gaze. They are fully aware that their aesthetic is perceived as strange by the majority.
And that defiance is just beautifully captured in that common statement. If my boyfriend doesn't like me in Lolita, I would rather break up with him than change my style.
Wow. That is profound personal defiance against the expectations of the traditional relational script. They're establishing agency over their own appearance and identity.
Yes, but even that defiance exists within a framework that the global community, particularly the West, often interprets through the highly sexualized lens of the Lolita complex, or, a fascination with prepubescent-looking girls.
So it highlights this unavoidable tension. Their private act of aesthetic self-determination is constantly being reinterpreted and consumed by external forces, forcing their expression into this predefined, sexualized category.
Which brings us to the most architecturally significant subcultural shift, I think. The aged Joe, the bar hostesses, who managed to transform a traditionally deviant occupation into a legitimate path to financial independence.
And this shift happened precisely during the economic slump, right? When traditional routes to female employment were becoming precarious.
Yes, and Kokuma Gea magazine emerged as the central institutional legitimizer for this growing subculture.
And the magazine wasn't just read by hostesses, was it? That's the key.
No, that's the key to its social legitimacy. While it was aimed at hostesses, it was supported and read by a wide audience, including office workers and even teachers. It functioned to normalize hostessing, framing it not as a societal failure, but as a modern, empowering path to financial independence during hard economic times.
A direct counterpoint to the failed promise of the traditional housewife role.
And the entire framework of empowerment was built on conforming to a very specific anti-Japanese aesthetic standard. The magazine explicitly promoted westernized beauty ideals as a means to increase earning power.
The directives were stark.
Unbelievably so. To increase income and status, the hostesses must make her face appear as close to a Westerner's face as possible. This required dyeing natural black hair brown or blonde and emphasizing three-dimensional makeup to mimic Caucasian facial structure. Appearance was directly monetized.
So the efficiency model shifted. The system broke the male breadwinner, forcing women to create a new commercial system where they sell pseudo-romance. And the efficiency of that sale is dictated by how closely they adhere to an imported foreign beauty standard.
The profit is generated directly from the deep crisis of identity on both sides. Trauma and systemic failure are repackaged as entrepreneurial opportunity. It's the ultimate neoliberal response to a shattered social contract.
And this successful commercialization of trauma leads us to the final, most polished layer of the architecture, the Cool Japan strategy, which is the official global export of this complex, contradictory culture.
Cool Japan is a deliberate post-war rebranding effort. Following the economic stagnation and realizing the limitations of traditional diplomacy, the government shifted resources, primarily through agencies like MIDI, the Ministry of Economy, Trade, and Industry, to focus on cultural exports.
Anime, manga, J-pop.
All of it. The explicit goal is the growth of soft power.
And that soft power is meant to counteract decades of precarious diplomatic relations with countries like South Korea and China, which still hold these profound historical grievances.
And we can see the strategy having fluctuating success. The data showed a rise in positive sentiment in both China and South Korea between 2014 and 2019, followed by a dip, then a slight recovery. It's working, but it's fragile. And the irony is that the content they promote often directly contradicts the peaceful, cool narrative they want to project.
The government's own guidelines for narrating Japanese culture prominently mentions Attack on Titan,
a series that has been banned in China and caused diplomatic issues in South Korea due to potential glorification of imperial Japanese military motifs.
That structural irony is profound. So the mechanism of soft power often relies on promoting the most rebellious, compelling, and historically charged content, even if that content pushes against the official narrative the government wants to present.
The export needs an edge to be compelling, and that edge comes from domestic friction.
And to maintain that polished, cool Japan facade, the domestic reality is governed by hard silences. What topics are conspicuously absent from the mainstream Japanese media?
The official narrative is sustained by maintaining the myth of social homogeneity and stability. We know the high-level taboos. The imperial family, the Buddhist bureaucracy, the police. Those are simply not scrutinized.
But the deeper psychological taboos are what sustain the illusion of social perfection.
The media meticulously avoids sustained discussion of painful structural subjects. This includes child poverty, the growing crisis of single mothers, groping, rape, sexual abuse, and crucially, they actively censor topics of mental illness.
How?
Sometimes even editing out words like crazy or schizophrenia from public discourse to maintain the appearance of a mentally healthy, integrated society. They also perpetuate the myth of low crime rates by generally avoiding focused coverage of crimes committed by Japanese people, reinforcing that homogeneity ideal.
It's the classic pattern. If you refuse to acknowledge a problem exists, you're absolved of the need to solve it. And that silence extends directly to where it hurts marginalized communities the most.
You look at the LGBTQ+ community. Despite growing public support for same-sex marriage and general acceptance, Japan remains the only G7 nation without legal LGBTQ+ protections. The governing Liberal Democratic Party, the LDP, maintains a profound and structural opposition to gender equality and sexual diversity.
And this opposition isn't passive. It actively obstructs legislative change.
We saw this with recent efforts to pass new laws promoting equality, where the LDP pushed through these last-minute changes that activists feared would actually threaten them rather than promote equality. The state prioritizes the preservation of a traditional conservative status quo, the myth of the Daikoku Bushira's world over fundamental human rights, even though that status quo is functionally obsolete.
So we've traced the system from its promise of stability to its economic betrayal in the 90s. We saw how that betrayal created a massive vacuum of identity and desire. And we saw how that vacuum was filled instantly by these incredibly lucrative commercialized systems designed to monetize the resulting shame, anxiety, and unfulfilled intimacy.
The financial architect created this structural failure, and the commercial architect filled it with profitable, quasi-legal intimacy. We saw men and women voluntarily submitting to highly exploitative commercial environments hosts, enduring immense pressure to test themselves and regain mastery.
And clients financially ruining themselves for jidirenai, yet claiming they purchased personal strength and mental support.
Right.
The insight that lingers for me is that when the system breaks and the traditional rules disappear, the impulse isn't necessarily revolution or a demand for structural change. It's often a voluntary submission to a new, highly commercialized and hyper-efficient set of rules. Why?
Because those new rules, however exploitative, provide the structure, the identity, and the illusion of agency that the traditional world stripped away.
The escape routes, the lucrative subcultures, the pseudo-romance, the very act of disappearance, they weren't temporary acts of cultural defiance.
No, they became so deeply institutionalized and commercially necessary that they ceased to be outside the system. They became the new, highly profitable system of control. The economy found a way to commodify the existential crisis itself.
So the ultimate question for you, the listener, is this. When rebellion, self-expression, and even emotional support are simply easy consumption and subject to massive markups, is there any true agency left? Or are we just purchasing our place in the new, highly efficient architecture of control?
You're left wondering, in a world where everything, including your deepest desire for validation, is branded, sold, and subject to an 8x markup, who is truly in control of the transaction?
This episode is powered by NeonKore Media for stories they said were too real to tell.